You are witnessing the moment it finally happened, late Thursday night, just after 11 p.m., when a video pushed out on Donald Trump's own social media platform detonated inside his coalition, not outside it, because the clip was not controversial, it was not edgy, it was not taken out of context. It contained racist cartoon imagery depicting former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama with ape-like bodies. And by early morning, the first condemnations did not come from Democrats. They came from black conservative figures with ties to Trump, people who have almost never criticized him publicly. By Friday morning, statements had been issued. By midday, invitations were revoked. By evening, Trump's advisors were on the phone nonstop, trying to put toothpaste back into a tube without a cap. And let me be very clear about why you can trust what I'm telling you. This is not a rumor, not anonymous whispering, not a sources say story built on vibes or speculation. There is evidence. It is shareable. It is traceable, posted, captured, and responded to in public. Stay with me. Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because what I'm about to lay out next shows how a single post exposed cracks Trump cannot intimidate, litigate, or spin away. Late Thursday night, just after 11 p.m., a moment when in Washington, political professionals generally assume the day is over and the headlines are already set, Donald Trump's own media operation carried out an act that can hardly be described as accidental. On his social media platform, a video was amplified that relied on one of the oldest and most toxic racist tropes in American history, a cartoon depiction portraying former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama with ape-like bodies. This point needs to be stated clearly. There was no gray area here, no subtlety, no plausible claim of being taken out of context. The imagery was direct, immediate, and unmistakable. And in an era when every piece of content can be captured, archived, and shared within seconds, the moment it appeared was the moment it became permanent. Within hours, the video spread across the political ecosystem. Screenshots were shared, newsrooms began making calls, conservative operatives reached out to one another, not to ask whether it had happened, but to pose a single stark question: who authorized this, and why wasn't it stopped? Then came what Trump's inner circle fears most. The initial backlash did not come from Democrats. It came from a small but politically consequential group, black conservatives who had stood beside Trump, defended him publicly, and been used as evidence of the legitimacy of the broader movement. As Thursday night turned into Friday morning, several of those figures spoke out. There was no evasion, no blaming the media, no invocation of both sides. These were carefully considered but unmistakable criticisms, a rebuke. That is what happened. And this is not merely a media scandal, it is a test of loyalty, of discipline, and of power inside a coalition that Donald Trump has long treated as his personal possession. This is the moment the story truly turns. Not when social media erupts in outrage, that always happens. Not when Democratic politicians issue their familiar condemnations, that too was predictable. But when unease begins spreading inside Donald Trump's own world. Because this time it was not an off-the-cuff remark at a campaign rally, not a comment that could be brushed aside with the familiar excuse, "That's just Trump talking." This was content that was published, whether intentionally or not no longer matters, by his own media operation on a platform that bears his name. And in politics, the line between what a politician says and what their operation posts is the line between personal chaos and the responsibility of power. Early Friday morning, the White House moved into its familiar crisis management routine. The video was taken down. A rapid explanation followed. A staffer posted it by mistake. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt initially tried to minimize the severity, calling it an internet meme video and urging reporters to stop the fake outrage. By midday, a White House official confirmed to ABC News that the post was the result of a staff error. Donald Trump, for his part, chose distance over responsibility. He told reporters that he had not watched the full video before it was shared at 11:44 p.m. "I only watched the beginning," Trump said. "It was about election fraud, and it was fine." When asked whether he would apologize, his answer was unequivocal: "No, I didn't make a mistake." And when pressed about the racist imagery, he offered only a brief line, "Of course I condemn it," without issuing any public apology. But in the age of screenshots and permanent digital memory, those explanations do not alter the central fact. The racist cartoon imagery depicting former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama with ape-like bodies, set to the song "The Lion Sleeps Tonight," appeared, was captured, and spread. And the fact that it occurred during Black History Month is not incidental. It is context. It heightens the moral weight and raises the political cost of any attempt to downplay what happened. Civil rights organizations responded clearly and without ambiguity. Derek Johnson, president of the NAACP, called the video clearly racist, disgusting, and utterly reprehensible. But the pivotal development in this story does not lie there. It lies in what unfolded within the ranks of Black conservatives who have stood beside Trump, individuals long used as a political shield against accusations of racial grievance politics. The Black Conservative Federation, an organization closely aligned with Trump and one that invited him to serve as keynote speaker at its 2024 gala, issued a rare public rebuke. The group said that portraying Black public figures in dehumanizing ways, especially using imagery historically deployed to demean African Americans, is unacceptable, offensive, and indefensible. It described the post as a serious lapse in judgment and warned that such conduct erodes trust within the African American community. Then came the most symbolically powerful response. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, the longest-serving Black senator in U.S. history. Writing on X, Scott said, "I pray this is fake, because this is the most racist thing I've seen come out of this White House. The president should take it down." Trump later confirmed that he spoke with Scott by phone, explaining that the video had been posted in error and removed. But the call itself underscored the gravity of the moment. When a president must personally reassure racially symbolic allies, this is no longer a routine media stumble. On the other side, some Black conservative figures chose to defend Trump. C.J. Pearson, who worked on Trump's 2016 campaign, called the post a clear mistake and insisted President Trump is not racist. Pierre Wilson of Turning Point USA Rise said he would not share the video but argued that the backlash was overblown. That contrast between those saying this is the line and those urging move on and ignore it exposed a deeper fracture within the coalition. Because this episode did not force a choice between Democrats and Republicans. It forced a choice between silence and self-respect, between continuing to serve as moral cover for a movement and acknowledging that there are images, histories, and offenses that cannot be justified by party discipline or policy accomplishments. That is why this moment matters. A single post became a mirror, reflecting how power is exercised, how responsibility is avoided, and the cost paid by those asked to keep defending it. And the reaction from within Donald Trump's own coalition reveals a simple, unavoidable truth. Not everyone is willing to look into that mirror and pretend they see nothing. This is the moment when the story stops being about a single post and becomes about damage that cannot be undone by an order, a statement, or the personal will of someone long accustomed to evading responsibility. By late Friday afternoon, as news programs began moving on to other topics, the consequences inside Donald Trump's political operation were only just beginning to settle in and take root. The atmosphere had clearly shifted. What had once been instinctive defiance gave way to a quieter effort at damage control. Not damage control in public, damage control behind closed doors, where senior advisors, figures like Susie Wiles, Chris LaCivita, and members of the inner communications team were forced to confront a question they usually avoid: who exactly is still allowed to speak and on whose behalf? Because an uncomfortable reality had surfaced. When criticism no longer comes from Democrats, no longer comes from MSNBC or CNN, but instead comes from within your own coalition, the familiar playbook stops working. Donald Trump has long been comfortable dismissing Democratic outrage as partisan theater. He is equally practiced at branding press criticism as bias. Even backlash from corporations or civil society groups can be waved away with a familiar phrase, woke pressure. But this time was different. This time, the objections came from precisely the people Trump's campaign has relied on for years to argue that his movement is not driven by racial grievance politics. When Senator Tim Scott, the longest-serving black senator in U.S. history, publicly wrote on X that he hoped this was fake and described the video as the most racist thing he had seen from this White House, it ceased to be a media controversy. It became a symbolic rupture. And when the Black Conservative Federation, an organization that had previously celebrated Trump as a strategic ally, issued a statement calling the imagery dehumanizing and unacceptable, the political armor protecting Trump began to crack. And it was that armor, not the post itself, that sustained the real damage. What took the hit was the central unspoken claim Trump has made for years, that he exercises total control over everything around him, control over messaging, control over allies, control over narrative discipline. For a long time, that claim allowed him to maintain power through fear and dependency. This time, the illusion fractured. In the hours following the backlash, conservative organizations, from pro-Trump passees to right-wing media platforms, began to adjust quietly. There were no public withdrawals, no formal cancellations, just invitations under review, appearances postponed, phone calls that went unanswered. This is how Washington creates distance while preserving an exit ramp. And Trump himself? He did what he almost always does. He did not apologize. He did not accept responsibility. He did not directly engage the criticism. In Trump's political universe, silence is not restraint. It is a declaration of dominance. But that strategy only works when everyone around him agrees to remain silent as well. And this is the critical turning point. When black conservative voices like Tim Scott and commentators who had previously defended Trump in public demonstrated that speaking out did not result in immediate political annihilation, they altered the calculation for everyone else watching. Dissent became possible. Loyalty became conditional. A coalition held together by fear survives only as long as that fear is believed to be absolute. The moment that belief weakens, even slightly, power begins to erode. Inside Republican strategic circles, the central question began to shift. No longer a moral question, was this racist? Because the answer was obvious. Instead, it became a leadership question. Why does this keep happening, and why can't anyone stop it? In politics, repeated failures are not treated as accidents. They are attributed to the person at the top. That is the reality Trump's allies are now being forced to confront. If a platform bearing his name can broadcast imagery like this, and if his operation cannot, or will not, prevent it, then every future controversy becomes predictable. And predictable scandals eventually stop being manageable. That is where the story pauses, for now. Not with a dramatic collapse, but with erosion. Slow, quiet, persistent, and the question is no longer theoretical. If you are an ally who has spent years defending Donald Trump, how many times can you explain away moments like this before the explanation itself collapses under its own weight? Donald Trump's coalition is not a philosophical club. It is a political machine, held together by access, attention, and leverage. And after an incident like this, the question inside that coalition becomes brutally practical. What is the cost of staying close, and what is the cost of stepping back? And that is precisely why the most likely next steps will not be dramatic resignations in front of cameras. They will be quieter and, for that reason, far more dangerous. First, expect a coordinated effort to reframe the story, an effort to shift the focus away from what was posted and toward the people who reacted to it. That means Trump-aligned media and surrogates will likely deploy a familiar pressure tactic, questioning motives. Dissenters will be portrayed as seeking attention, selling out, or working with the other side. The goal is not to deny racism. The goal is to punish the act of naming it. Second, watch for a loyalty test disguised as unity. Trump's operation will almost certainly try to force allies into visible alignment, showing up at an event, sharing a statement, standing together in a photo, posting a supportive clip. In Trump's world, images are currency. A single photograph can be used as proof that the scandal is over, that the coalition remains intact, that the critics are insignificant. But here is the tell. If they have to demand the photo, it means they don't have it. If they have to ask for the statement, it means the statement is not coming organically, and that means the fracture is real. Third, expect internal personnel warfare. When content like this circulates, someone becomes the scapegoat, a staffer, a contractor, a rogue account. Trump's team will want a culprit not primarily to fix the problem, but to restore the myth of total control. The question is whether they can credibly claim this was an accident without admitting that their platform is either reckless by design or structurally incompetent. Fourth, and this is the most important prediction, watch the donor class and adjacent institutional conservatives, not the loud ones, the quiet ones, the people who fund operations, sponsor conferences, underwrite PACs, and decide which voices get elevated. These people rarely make moral arguments in public, but they are highly sensitive to reputational contagion. If they conclude that Trump's coalition is becoming unmarketable, or that it is sliding into racial grievance politics as a systemic feature, they will not announce a break. They will simply redirect money, attention, and invitations. And when that happens, Trump's power does not disappear. It becomes more brittle. Finally, watch how black conservative critics behave next. If they retreat quickly under pressure, Trump will interpret the episode as a successful enforcement action. But if even a small number hold their ground, if they repeat the criticism, expand it, or connect it to broader patterns, then you are witnessing the beginning of an internal narrative shift. From Trump is unfairly accused to Trump is unsafe to defend. At what point does this stop being politics and become something else entirely? A test of whether a coalition can still recognize basic boundaries? If you want the answer laid out clearly, step by step, without the fog, stay with me. Because the conclusion of this story is neither comforting nor complicated, a line was crossed, and once crossed, it changes what comes next. And this is what everything that just happened ultimately comes down to. A line was crossed, not by an anonymous troll on the internet, not by a political opponent trying to smear Donald Trump, but by Trump's own political ecosystem, amplifying racist, dehumanizing imagery aimed at Barack and Michelle Obama. And once that happened, the real story was never about how Democrats reacted. The real story was always whether Trump's coalition could still recognize a boundary. If a political movement can accept the oldest racist caricatures in American history simply because they deliver political advantage, then that movement is no longer just fighting the media. It is not merely owning the libs. It is normalizing something corrosive, something that never stays confined to campaign politics. It moves outward. It shapes what people feel permitted to say in schools, in workplaces, and in public life. It rewrites the definition of what is considered acceptable. And that is why the rare public criticism from black conservative allies mattered so much. Not because they suddenly became liberals, not because they switched parties, but because they did something Trump cannot easily erase. They put the truth on the public record. From inside the tent, Trump can attack the press. He can attack Democrats. He can threaten lawsuits. He can flood the public sphere with new distractions. But he cannot unpost what was posted. He cannot unsee what people already saw, and he cannot fully control what happens when allies decide that the cost of silence is higher than the cost of speaking out. This is the moment you need to pay attention, because if a coalition cannot draw the line here at openly dehumanizing racist imagery, then you are watching the collapse of a basic democratic norm, the idea that there are still some things you do not do, even to win. Stay with this channel. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, because the next time this happens, it will not be an accident, it will be a test, and America will either fail it quietly or finally refuse it out loud.